August 23, 1944. Northern France. Command post in a stone barn 12 kilometers southwest of Argentan. Maps covered the table. Red and blue pencil marks traced movement corridors, assembly areas, and phase lines. Acetate overlays showed fields of fire and communication routes. Artillery plotting sheets lay stacked at one corner. A clock on the wall read 03:47 hours. 7 officers stood around the table. No one spoke. Outside, engines idled. 2 battalions, approximately 1,100 men, occupied positions in wooded areas north and east of the barn. Tanks were dispersed under camouflage netting. Infantry squads sat in ditches and hedgerows, weapons loaded, waiting for the signal to move. Mortars were sighted. Ammunition had been distributed. Medical stations were prepared. Everything was ready. The attack was scheduled for 04:30 hours. 43 minutes remained. The objective was a road junction 2 kilometers northeast, currently held by elements of the German 7th Army attempting to escape the Falaise Pocket. Intelligence estimated enemy strength at battalion level, disorganized but still armed. The American plan called for coordinated armor and infantry assault to seize the junction and block the escape route. Standard procedure. Clear objective. Adequate force. The commanding officer, a lieutenant colonel, stood at the head of the table. His hand rested on the map. His eyes moved across the terrain features one more time. He did not speak. No one moved. The unit was a combined task force from the 90th Infantry Division, temporarily reinforced with a company of M4 Sherman tanks from an attached armored battalion. They had been advancing through the Argentan sector for 3 days, encountering scattered resistance as German forces attempted to withdraw eastward through the narrowing corridor between American and Canadian forces. The road junction, designated as the objective, sat at the intersection of 2 secondary routes used by retreating German columns. Aerial reconnaissance conducted the previous afternoon had identified vehicle movement and concentrations of personnel in the area. Capturing the junction would cut one of the remaining withdrawal routes and trap additional enemy forces within the pocket. Division headquarters had approved the operation at 21:00 hours on August 22 and designated H-hour as 04:30 on the 23rd. Terrain was typical bocage country, small fields divided by thick hedgerows, sunken lanes, scattered farm buildings. Visibility would be limited until well after dawn. The approach route followed a farm track through a series of fields, emerging onto the main road 500 meters south of the objective. Reconnaissance patrols had verified the route was passable for armor and had encountered no enemy positions along it. Weather conditions were acceptable. No rain. Temperature cool but not uncomfortable. Wind light and variable. The moon had set at 02:15, leaving full darkness. Dawn would begin breaking around 05:30, providing enough light for final positioning before the assault but not enough to expose the approach prematurely. The plan itself was conventional. Lead elements would advance at 04:30 under cover of darkness, establish positions surrounding the junction, and await the order to assault at first light. Artillery preparation would begin at 05:45, followed immediately by the armor infantry advance. Estimated time to secure the objective, 30 to 45 minutes. Expected casualties, moderate, primarily from German small arms and possible anti-tank weapons firing from prepared positions. All officers present had reviewed the plan. Questions had been asked and answered during the briefing at 22:30 hours. Company commanders had returned to their units to conduct final preparations. At 03:30, the lieutenant colonel had called his staff back to the command post for a final confirmation. They had reassembled around the map table, and now they stood silent while the clock continued its advance toward H-hour. American Combined Arms Doctrine in 1944 emphasized coordination, firepower, and momentum. Infantry and armor were to advance in mutual support, with tanks providing mobile firepower against strongpoints while infantry cleared positions and protected armor from close-range anti-tank threats. Artillery would suppress enemy positions and disrupt counterattacks. The sequence was practiced, refined through months of combat in France, and understood by all participants. The lieutenant colonel had commanded in combat since June. His experience included the initial landings in Normandy and the subsequent breakout operations. He understood the mechanics of small unit assault and the importance of timing in coordinated attacks. His battalion had executed similar operations multiple times with acceptable results. Losses had been within predicted ranges. Objectives had been achieved. The procedures worked. His staff officers were similarly experienced. The operations officer had planned the approach and calculated timings. The intelligence officer had assessed enemy strength and capabilities. The logistics officer had ensured ammunition and fuel were positioned for sustained operations. The communications officer had established radio links with supporting artillery and adjacent units. Each had fulfilled his function. The plan was sound. Tank company commanders had coordinated their movement with infantry squad leaders. Routes had been walked in darkness. Recognition signals had been established. Everyone knew their start positions, movement corridors, and final assault positions. The level of preparation was thorough. Nothing had been overlooked. The operation was ready to proceed exactly as designed. Doctrine also emphasized the commander's responsibility to execute approved operations unless conditions changed significantly. Hesitation or delay without cause undermined coordination with higher headquarters and adjacent units. The division was conducting multiple simultaneous operations across the sector. This attack was one component of a larger effort to compress the Falaise Pocket. Failure to execute on schedule could create gaps or leave other units exposed. The expectation among all personnel was clear. At 04:30, the lead elements would move out. The attack would proceed. By mid-morning, the junction would be in American hands, and the task force would consolidate for the next phase. This was understood. This was planned. This was what happened in war when plans were made and orders given. At 04:11 hours, the lieutenant colonel picked up a grease pencil. He held it above the map. His hand did not move. The tip hovered over the acetate overlay, positioned above the red arrow indicating the axis of advance. He set the pencil down. He looked at the clock, 19 minutes until H hour. He looked back at the map. His hand moved to the edge of the table. His fingers pressed against the wood. He stood completely still. The operations officer glanced at him, then at the other staff members. No one spoke. The lieutenant colonel's expression showed nothing. He was not distressed. He was not uncertain. He simply stood, staring at the map, not moving. Seconds passed. 10, 20. The clock ticked audibly in the silence. Outside, an engine coughed and restarted. Someone's boots scraped on gravel. Inside the barn, no sound except breathing and the clock. The lieutenant colonel reached for the map. His hand stopped midway. He withdrew it. He looked at the clock again. 17 minutes. He turned away from the table. He walked 3 steps toward the door. He stopped. He turned back. He stood facing the map from a distance of 2 meters. No order was given. No explanation offered. The officers waited. The clock advanced. H hour approached. And the plan, fully prepared, properly coordinated, ready to execute, remained on the table untouched. At 04:25, 5 minutes before the scheduled start, the operations officer cleared his throat. The lieutenant colonel did not respond. The officer remained silent. The others shifted positions slightly, adjusting their weight, but no one spoke. The tension in the room had changed quality. It was no longer the tension of imminent action. It was the tension of uncertainty. Company commanders waited in their positions with their units. Radio operators monitored their sets, expecting the order to commence movement. Tank crews sat in their vehicles, engines warm, ready to advance. Infantry squad leaders checked their watches and prepared to tap the shoulders of their lead scouts. Everything was synchronized to begin at 04:30. The entire mechanism was poised to activate, but no order came from the command post. At 04:30 exactly, nothing happened. Lead elements remained in their positions. Tanks did not move. Infantry did not stand. Radio operators exchanged glances with their officers. One company commander, positioned closest to the command post, sent a runner to request confirmation. The runner arrived at 04:34 and was told to wait outside. The staff officers in the barn remained around the table. The map had not been touched. The overlays remained in place. The lieutenant colonel stood near the door, facing away from the table now, looking at the wall. His posture was rigid. His hands were clasped behind his back. He did not turn around. Minutes accumulated. 04:35, 04:40, 04:45. The window for darkness-covered approach was closing. Dawn would begin shortly. The tactical advantage of moving under concealment was eroding with each passing minute. Coordination with the artillery schedule was breaking down. The entire plan depended on precise timing. That timing was now compromised. Still no order. The operations officer looked at the intelligence officer. Neither spoke. The logistics officer checked his watch for the 5th time. The communications officer stood by his radio, waiting for something to transmit. The clock reached 04:50. Full darkness would last perhaps another 30 minutes. After that, any approach would be conducted in growing light, increasing vulnerability and reducing surprise. The lieutenant colonel remained motionless, facing the wall. The plan remained on the table. The units remained in position. And the moment for execution passed, second by second, into the past. At 05:03 hours, the lieutenant colonel turned from the wall and addressed the operations officer. He stated that the attack was canceled. No explanation was provided at that moment. The operations officer asked if new orders would follow. The lieutenant colonel said no. The task force would hold current positions and await further instructions from division headquarters. The official report filed later that morning, archived in division records dated August 23, 1944, states that the operation was postponed pending clarification of enemy dispositions. A subsequent entry dated August 24 notes that the objective was secured by another unit without resistance, as German forces had withdrawn during the night of the 23rd. What occurred in the lieutenant colonel's assessment between 03:47 and 05:03 was not documented in detail. Later conversations with staff members, recorded in fragmentary post-war accounts, suggest several factors. First, intelligence reports received after midnight indicated larger-than-expected German formations moving through the sector. The assessment of battalion-level, disorganized strength appeared increasingly uncertain. Second, communications intercepts suggested German forces were executing a coordinated withdrawal rather than a panicked retreat, implying potentially stronger resistance than anticipated. Additionally, the lieutenant colonel had noted during the final review that friendly forces on the northern flank, Canadian units advancing from the opposite direction, were ahead of their expected schedule. The possibility existed that attacking the junction would bring American forces into proximity with Canadian positions in darkness, creating risk of friendly fire. Coordination protocols between different national forces were functional but not seamless. The margin for error was narrow. Most significantly, the tactical value of the objective had diminished. If German forces were withdrawing in an organized manner, seizing one junction would not trap them but only redirect their movement. The cost in casualties to achieve a temporary blocking position seemed disproportionate to the gain. The larger strategic objective, compressing and destroying German forces in the pocket, was already being achieved through coordinated pressure from multiple directions. These considerations were tactical and operational. They involved calculations of risk, resources, and outcome. The decision to cancel was not based on reluctance or fear. It was an assessment that the conditions assumed during planning had changed sufficiently that execution no longer made sense. The plan had been sound when developed. It was no longer sound at the moment of execution. Therefore, it was not executed. At 05:07, the operations officer transmitted cancellation orders to all subordinate units. Company commanders acknowledged receipt. Engines were shut down. Infantry remained in position but stood down from immediate readiness. Tank crews dismounted and began routine maintenance. The task force transitioned from assault posture to static security within 15 minutes. No discussion occurred regarding the decision. Company commanders did not question the cancellation. Soldiers accepted the change without comment. The shift from action to inaction was procedurally simple. Orders were given, orders were followed. The emotional preparation for combat, the adrenaline, the focus, the acceptance of risk, dissipated gradually over the following hour as dawn broke and the immediate danger receded. By 06:30, the task force had repositioned into defensive configuration. Patrols were sent forward to maintain contact with any remaining enemy forces. Observation posts were established covering the road junction from a distance. Routine security procedures replaced assault preparations. The day transitioned into a pattern familiar from previous operations, waiting, observing, responding to developments as they occurred. At 09:15, reconnaissance elements reported that the road junction was empty. German forces had withdrawn during the night. American patrols moved forward cautiously and occupied the position without resistance. The objective that had been the target of extensive planning and preparation was secured without firing a shot. The roads were littered with abandoned equipment, disabled vehicles, discarded ammunition, personal items dropped during hasty movement. No enemy personnel remained. The lieutenant colonel observed this outcome without visible reaction. He issued orders for the task force to consolidate at the junction and prepare for continued advance. Units moved forward, established new positions, and resumed the rhythm of advance, consolidation, and advance again. The canceled attack became one event among many in the continuous sequence of operations that constituted the campaign. No formal review was conducted. No after-action assessment questioned the decision. The operation had been planned, then canceled, and the objective had been achieved without loss. From a command perspective, the outcome was acceptable. The process by which that outcome occurred was not examined. The canceled operation appears in division records only as a brief notation. Task Force redacted. Attack on Objective Dog postponed 23 AUG. Objective secured by Patrol 24 AUG. No amplifying details are provided. No casualty figures are listed because no casualties occurred. The extensive planning materials, maps, overlays, coordination instructions, were filed in routine operational archives and eventually lost or destroyed in accordance with standard document retention procedures. The lieutenant colonel's decision was not reported upward as unusual or noteworthy. Battalion and company commanders did not discuss it in their own reports. The event lacked the characteristics that generate documentation: casualties, significant enemy contact, tactical failures, or exceptional successes. It was simply an operation that did not occur, leaving no trace beyond administrative notation. Post-war unit histories of the 90th Infantry Division, compiled from official records and veteran accounts, do not mention the incident. The August 23 date appears in chronological summaries as part of the general advance through the Falaise sector, but without specific detail. Historians analyzing the closing of the Falaise Pocket focus on major engagements and strategic decisions at Corps and Army level. Small unit operations that did not result in combat do not feature in these analyses. Individual participants, when interviewed decades later, recalled the period in general terms. One company commander mentioned, "Several times we prepared to attack and then did, but provided no specific dates or locations." A tank platoon leader remembered a lot of waiting around during the Falaise fighting, but could not recall particular incidents. Memory requires narrative structure. An event that consists of preparation followed by cancellation followed by uneventful advance lacks the structure that makes stories memorable. The silence in the record is complete. The battle plan existed, was fully prepared, and then was erased, not physically but operationally, by the decision not to execute. That erasure left no mark except the absence of casualties that would have occurred had the attack proceeded. The lieutenant colonel continued in command through the remainder of the European campaign. His service record notes competent leadership and successful completion of assigned missions. He was promoted to colonel in early 1945 and commanded a regiment during the final advance into Germany. He received standard decorations for service, but no specific commendations related to the August 23 incident. No reprimands appear in his file. The decision to cancel the attack had no documented effect on his career. He returned to civilian life in 1946 and worked in insurance administration until retirement. He did not write memoirs. He participated in one veterans' reunion in 1962, but left no recorded remarks from that event. He died in 1978. His obituary in a local newspaper mentioned his military service in general terms without specifics. The operations officer remained in the Army and served in Korea. He retired as a lieutenant colonel in 1954. In a 1983 letter responding to a military history researcher's inquiry about the Falaise campaign, he mentioned that his division had conducted numerous small operations, some of which proceeded, and some of which were adjusted based on changing conditions. He provided no further detail. He died in 1987. Of the company commanders present that night, 2 were killed in subsequent fighting in September and October 1944. A third was wounded near the German border and evacuated. The others completed their service and returned home. None left written accounts that reference the canceled attack. Their experiences in combat included hundreds of operations over months of continuous fighting. One canceled attack, resulting in no casualties and achieving its objective anyway, had no distinguishing features that warranted special attention in memory. The soldiers who waited in ditches and tank crews who sat with engines idling experienced the cancellation as a reprieve, one day among many when death was possible but did not occur. They moved forward the next day and faced other dangers. The pattern repeated until the war ended. Specific dates and locations blurred together into the general experience of survival. The road junction southwest of Argentan still exists. The roads have been paved and widened. The hedgerows were removed during agricultural modernization in the 1950s. The fields are larger now, worked by machinery rather than hand tools. Traffic passes routinely. No marker indicates that armies once converged there or that an attack was planned and then canceled. August 23, 1944, was one day in a campaign that lasted months. Thousands of tactical decisions were made that day across hundreds of kilometers of front. Most are unrecorded. Some resulted in combat. Others did not. The distinction matters to archives and casualty lists, but operationally both types of decisions were necessary. Not every plan executes. Not every prepared attack proceeds. The battle plan was erased at the last second by a commander's assessment that conditions had changed and execution no longer made sense. The unit stood down. The objective was achieved without fighting. The record stayed blank. The individuals involved moved on to other operations, other dangers, other moments when decisions had to be made under incomplete information and insufficient time. What did not happen left no monument and required no explanation. The plan existed. The decision was made. The attack was canceled. The war continued. Years passed. The moment dissolved into the vast category of things that were prepared but not executed, and which therefore occupy no space in history except as silence, complete, unremarkable, and absolute. The map remained on the table for several hours, then was folded and filed. The pencil marks showing the axis of advance were never followed. The assault that had been planned in detail and prepared with care simply did not occur. And the absence, like all absences, left nothing to mark where it had been.